record on this computer. Welcome to the LFC Delaware podcast. It's the 5th edition. Lovely to see the number of views keep going up. I think we're over 70 on one of the podcasts now, which in my world sounds pretty good. So today we're joined by James Martin. He's a freelance writer, and he writes about Liverpool Football Club. We got connected to him because he recently wrote a piece about supporters clubs here in the US. And even though he didn't mention us by name, we hope to get in the next piece by maybe relating one or two of the ritual stories that we've got around the pub. So welcome, James.
Thanks very much.
Thanks for joining us. Yeah, we've got the usual crowd of Timmy, Charlie, and Sean, and myself. And before we get started, just a couple of quick announcements. One of those things is we just started a campaign end of last week, which we're entitling #ReachOutToARed. So we're trying to encourage people, certainly within our supporters club and kind of wider than that, to reach out to people who are supporters of the team that we may not have heard of for a couple of weeks, may not have heard of since the lockdown happened. I think we've already kind of got a few people to come out to some of our events who may not otherwise have done by the campaign. So anyway, #ReachOutToARed, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, wherever you can. Okay. And then what else do we want to talk about? Oh, yeah. So this week on our happy hour, we had the pleasure of being joined by Chris Perkins. So this is a public service announcement. Chris Perkins wrote the book called Let's Talk About Six, which you can get on Amazon. I know that because we did. And that's, he basically captures the 2018-19 season from his own perspective, along with some reflections about his kind of history of being a fan of the team. We had a very entertaining couple of hours, and having kind of dipped into the book myself, I'd recommend it. And then final public service announcement is Delaware. So we'll try and get the podcast out today. Tomorrow, Delaware at 10 a.m. is doing a big sale in aid of their staff. Those of you know Alex Sayani, he's a member of our supporters club. Him and his wife own Delaware. And if we can get out there and support him, as many of us as can, I think that would be really powerful in this moment.
So, the address is 1836 Lovering Street in Wilmington, for those that need to get there.
Thanks, Thanks. Yeah.
Over the border.
I'm glad you pointed that out because they actually have two shops. So it's, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Please go to the right one. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Pick up lunch at Catherine Rooney's while you're in there.
Right. Thank you. Yes. Other public service announcements I forgot to do. All right. So we're going to do a couple things today. One is we're going to talk to James about his work and what he's written about. And then we're going to turn it around, and I think he has a few questions for us about our supporters club. And there's been quite a few topics on Facebook this week I think we'll want to get to. And then before we're done, we need to have a really serious discussion about FIFA, apparently, which I will step back from, having no knowledge of what you're talking about. Well, maybe a little bit, but I haven't watched it. So, okay. So anyone feel free to chime in with a question, but kind of general kickoff, James. How did you start writing about Liverpool?
Well, before we kick off, sounds like I should start with an apology for not quite making it into the piece. But invite me on another couple of calls, and you'll be golden for the next one, I'm sure. But yeah, so I started a long time ago now, when I was sort of 13. The LFC Fans Corner, they're quite big on Twitter now. But they were pretty small at the time. I liked their page on Facebook. This was before I had Twitter or anything like that. And they just put out a general call for writers. I thought, I don't know if I'll have a shot at this, given that I'm essentially a child. But we'll put something out there, and they seemed eager. And so that started off as just a kind of match report type thing, fairly regular, once a week sort of idea. And yeah, I guess it just sort of spiraled a bit from that. I started thinking, this is good fun. Let's see if we can do a bit more with this. Started going in some different directions, got into more kind of featurey pieces, branched out in terms of the websites I write for, things like that. Although the US piece did end up on Fans Corner again, actually. So sort of full circle kind of thing. But But yeah, so basically, I've always been a fan as long as I can remember, and I enjoy my writing, so it's just a natural fit, really.
Cool. So you did say that you'd written a couple of pieces for the club's website. Is that?
Yeah, that's right. I was fortunate enough to be able to have some work experience there 2 summers ago now. Yeah, because it was the World Cup year. So so a couple of pieces were just on sort of the permutations for the Liverpool players at the World Cup. So who's getting through to the round of 16, that sort of thing. But then some of them, again, there was another American link there. Now I think about it, because coming up after the World Cup was the pre-season tour, which was of the US that year. So I was previewing some of the stadiums they'd be playing at, things like that. So yeah, that was good fun. Really interesting as well to sort of write from a different perspective, because obviously a lot of what I do is fan-sided, and this is more club-sided. So you've got to sort of get that kind of PR hat on, no criticism whatsoever. So yeah, that was an interesting experience.
You want to write another one, you better on this one, yeah.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, we should get out the kind of elephant in the room about Tim's disappointment about the piece that I didn't include in the when I sent the notes back to you.
It was funny because we had included like content, like asking about our clubs and stuff like that, and then when we read the actual article, you went more into drink rituals, I think, like maybe and shots in the South. And I said to Paul, like, this is my bread and butter, because I've been doing stuff since last season. Last season, I had a terrible ritual where I drank at least 1 pint of Carlsberg for every match.
Nice.
Didn't really lose one. Well, lost one, but and then this season, I think it was the Arsenal FA Cup match. For some reason, I decided to order a Bushmills whiskey on the rocks when it was, I think we were still down, and we obviously tied it up and then won it on the penalties at the end.
Yeah.
And so that spurned a very terrible tradition.
That's even more dangerous than the Carlsberg tradition, yeah.
Yeah, well, it became a thing where I had to have my pint of Guinness, and then if it wasn't working, my pint of Carlsberg, and then if it wasn't working, my Bushmills.
Yeah, that's the problem with Liverpool traditions, I suppose, because we just keep on winning. So it seems like they're working. So you can't stop them now.
Right. Yeah. It's still technically, no, it had been disproven. I'm sorry.
Paul, I haven't been. I haven't been able to make it to the pub very much this season. But do Lee and those guys still do a shot for every goal? The Grand Marnier shots.
I think they do. So it's harder to tell now. So one of the things you were asking us about.
Yeah, there's so many people there now. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So for the last week, the weekend games over the last couple of months, I counted at least 60 people there. So I think they do, but it's hard to tell because they're in kind of one corner and there's kind of people everywhere.
Back when it was like 10 or 15 people, everybody would get one.
Yeah.
It got a little pricey once we hit 20, 30 plus.
I usually didn't partake, but I was always offered one.
Right. Yeah. I didn't kind of partake in that tradition, especially as they used to continue it in those. So they were doing it when the first Klopp teams were crazy winning games.
Norwich
scored a lot of goals.
5-4 as an example. Yeah.
I wondered, was that the alcohol tie-in, was that part of what you thought that piece was going to be, James, or did that just, it turns out Americans are alcoholics? I don't.
A common thread, right?
No, that's a good question. To be honest, I think that's probably one of the reasons I was getting different aspects from the different groups I talked to, because I didn't really know exactly what form it was going to take when I set out talking to the groups. It was just kind of a generic curiosity, like what sort of shape does this support take over in the US? And some people were eager to talk about the drinking traditions, and I was eager to get them in the piece. And some people went down different roads, and it was all really interesting.
Yeah,
it was a great article. I really enjoyed it.
Cheers, man. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I think the one thing it does track is that the supporters groups, especially in some places, are just absolutely enormous.
Yeah, like particularly that sort of, well, there's too many to name check, but like Austin in particular seemed like there's massive numbers there.
Yeah. Talia, who's actually on our board, her brother is a member of Boston.
Oh yeah, Boston was massive as well. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Lots of drinkers there for sure.
Yeah. I think it was interesting actually. I don't know if I shared this with you. I was on a call with the club this week. They do this thing where people from supporters clubs come together every week now, and they called it Project You'll Never Walk Alone, which is basically to kind of keep the community together while there are no games. They showed a chart with supporters clubs, and I think Liverpool have 300 plus in 99 countries. But the interesting thing was the second in the list in the Premier League was Manchester City, which was like, what?
Wow. Huh.
And I got to thinking, and like they have 270, I think, but only in 50 countries.
Okay.
I got to thinking about that guy who came to the pub for one of our games, the City fan who told us that the Philadelphia Supporters Club was enormous. I mean, he said a lot of stuff that was completely erroneous, which would lead me to believe the club wasn't actually that enormous. But he only came to watch us lose. Like, he was delighted. I think it was one of those games where we conceded and then came back and won. But I do think that there is a big difference between like how many people are in some of those supporters clubs. You know, I think there's thousands in the New York one. I know from my sister that the Western Australia Supporters Club has 6,000 members.
Wow.
So
yeah, I think that was one of the nice things about them, though, the fact that just they take different sort of shapes about their everyday activities depending on how big they are, and the massive ones and the much more like community small ones. Like they both do some really cool stuff with what they're working with.
Yeah. No, I don't think we've. I think most of the people we've come across as well are really, kind of decent human beings as well. They're kind of not. I don't want to say everybody, but it doesn't feel like there's people kind of in it for themselves as much as they're trying to support the communities, especially right now, which is cool.
Yeah, I mean, it was a pretty common thread. Like everyone, pretty much, who I was talking to, they wanted to talk about what they were doing with their charity initiatives. And again, that's like you were saying to me, that's something I didn't necessarily know I'd be getting into when I started the piece. But it was so great to hear what everyone was doing for local charities, in some cases for Liverpool charities, and just it's quite emotional, really. Just this kind of group of people brought together literally just by this club, and just doing these amazing things for communities all over the world.
Yeah.
Interesting. Something we've talked about in maybe the one or two podcasts ago is how we got into supporting the club, and or basically what keeps us supporting the club. And, winning is good, but it seems like the more people you talk to, the more like the kind of global sense of family and like coming together for a greater good, some kind of charities and stuff like that is also woven into the club's DNA at this point. So it makes it feel a little bit better than, just coming together to watch a match once a weekend.
Yeah.
And then leaving. It kind of gives you a little bit of a purpose if you're searching for one.
Yeah. I've been really proud of what we've been able to do actually just in this last month in terms of kind of raising some money and kind of donating to a few really key causes like the local food bank. It's been really, yeah. The other kind of thoughts I've been having over this last week, which has been kind of very sad, is like one of the things that I think watching some of the highlights kind of gives you is some sense of joy that perhaps isn't being found in every other aspect of our lives right now with everything that's going on. So which kind of leads me to what is the kind of one or two memories that you have that kind of really find uplifting, especially right now, about your kind of support for the team?
Yes, I mean, it's a great question. A lot of them are going to come from when I was able to go to Anfield, sort of experience that atmosphere. But I think a strange one that I'm going to start with is that it was actually a testimonial game. So the sort of Legends games they put on, and it was just noticeable because it was so different to other clubs. I mean, some clubs, they can get decent crowds at these things, but no one seems that bothered about them. But for me, I mean, I've been lucky enough to go to Anfield a few times, but this was the only time I've been on the Kop, which and I mean, the atmosphere was amazing. You wouldn't know it was just this bunch of old men essentially sort of struggling to run around this pitch for a reduced 80-minute game because 90 was a bit too much of a stretch. I mean, it was absolutely buzzing, and then it was as if it was scripted when Gerrard scored the winner in the last minute Kop end. So that was pretty special. So yeah, that's a strange one that stands out for me. In terms of on the pitch, I mean, there's the obvious ones, aren't there? Sort of Champions League, Barcelona, and then going back further, 05, and then FA Cup 06. I mean, it's the kind of club which sort of feeds off these magical moments, really, that don't even feel real. But yeah, I suppose Barcelona would stand out in my mind at the moment, just because it was. I mean, I think the abiding image of that game for me is after the game when everyone came over to the Kop and sort of they were singing along with "You'll Never Walk Alone." These players from all over the world. I mean, you got Fabinho. He hadn't even been there that long at this point, sort of belting out the club anthem, and I thought that was pretty special.
Some of those photos are the best I've seen, where it's taken from behind the team and they're all standing with their arms over their shoulders, and you just see a wall of fans behind it. That'll be a memory for a long time for sure.
Yeah, that game was weird because I don't know about everybody else. I went into thinking like, well, there's no chance, like we have no chance of advancing, you know. So I'm like watching the game, thinking, you know, there's no way we're gonna do this, and then it happened. You're kind of like, I don't know. When the game ended, I was almost like, what just happened? You know, how did we do this? And that moment you're talking about at the end, it really kind of emphasized, you know, how significant it was. Mm-hmm. And I think in hindsight, I've said this on Facebook and other things before, that corner taken quickly moment is really it. I mean, that was a turning point for the club, I think. You know, it really was. It led to the obviously Champions League title, the 6th title, but more than that, I think I don't know. To me, it feels like a different. There's just a different feel to the club now, and it led into this year and the amazing run we had this year, and it's almost like you put the past demons behind you or something like that, you know. That was an amazing moment.
I think one, fortunately, we're able to keep going back to.
Yeah. So, what other topics have you written about recently, James? I'm not as familiar.
Sorry.
What other topics have you written about recently?
Well, obviously at the moment it's a bit of a scraping the barrel sort of situation because I'm a football writer and there's no football. But but I'm doing my best. So I've got a kind of review series going on at the moment of sports books and documentaries. So, you know, things to keep people busy in lockdown is the general idea. Plus, it was a good opportunity to slate the Manchester City documentary, which it's always fun. That didn't go down too well on Twitter as expected, but so that's what I've been doing more recently. Like I say, it's just an odd time for everybody, isn't it? I don't want to play my violin too much for the sports writers because I think there's people in plenty worse situations, but just trying to come up with ideas that would be vaguely interesting, really. I did one for Liverpool.com where I sort of did a deep dive into the Premier League rule book, just trying to find some kind of weird, obscure Premier League rules. It started off thinking, you know, how are we going to get out of this mess in terms of will the season be voided, will it not? There's nothing in there about that, totally unhelpful, but there is some pretty interesting stuff. I'd say that's the one I'd flag up from recent times.
Interesting, yeah. So they announced recently that all the football league is planning to move forward with the season, right? There's plans set
behind closed doors. Yeah.
You would think that the Champions League, the Premiership's gonna happen at that point. If the Championship's gonna finish, you would think that the Premier League will follow soon. But I guess we'll see.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the things that does strike me is this kind of urgency to kind of put a date on it. I kind of understand where it's coming from, but it seems like that would be really easy to resist until you actually know something about when it's likely that you could actually open up.
And I just think it's weird. I mean, obviously we're all, you know, James said we're not really doing much or going anywhere, but it does just feel like it's almost stuck in like this cyclical pattern. Because the thing that someone had posted today was talking about, like would there be a June 30th cutoff, and that there was some argument about that when, was it last week or even the week before, the FA, or not the FA, UEFA had come out and said, like, we're just going to extend this indefinitely. And they've talked about like rolling contract extensions and stuff like that. So it's almost like they've announced like, oh, your player's supposed to be leaving June 30th. That won't be an issue. But then a week later we say, well, isn't it an issue that our players are leaving June 30th? And it just feels like we're stuck in Groundhog Day even more now. I don't know.
Yeah. I had heard from a Chelsea supporter recently saying that he doesn't think there's any way that they can do it because of the contract issue. He's saying, and I don't really agree with him, but it's a legitimate point. I mean, the contracts are written that they end June 30th, right? So if you're a player that's out of contract at the end of the season, for example, like I think he was saying like Willian and Pedro, I think, are both out of contract. So like, what do they do? You know, I mean, I think they could probably figure it out some way, but it's not straightforward. You know, it's not as straightforward as they'd like, I think. So
the sort of, I don't want to say funny thing, but the ironic thing is that like everyone's talking about there's no precedence for this. And it's yeah, there's no precedence for this. Like literally the entire world is in a state of emergency.
Yeah.
We can make some extraordinary decisions now.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the reality of it, is there's no easy solution either way, but I think the bottom line is to ignore the 30 games they've played just makes no sense, you know, for anybody.
Well, you got to consider that there's no precedent. We're setting a precedent right now. So whatever we do is more important than this current season. It's setting a precedent for future seasons. And if this thing's going to flare up again come October, November, well, whatever we're doing now is setting a precedent for how we'll react in the future. You know, you wipe out this season and then the same thing happens in October, November. What are you going to wipe out another season? So instead of finishing the one that you were 3/4 through, you're now possibly going to wipe out 2 whole seasons. So it's very important.
Good point. Yeah.
From your perspective, James, how are things shaping up
in terms of
what's likely to happen? Because we're going by kind of random newspaper reports, right? Yeah,
sure. I sort of agree with you in the sense that it seems arbitrary to try and stick a date on it. I think some of the dates flying around, it is a case of there's no concrete news, so people want to print stuff and fans are going to read it. Because if someone says June the 30th, it's a concrete deadline, you're going to click on it, even if you think this is going to be total rubbish. I imagine and I hope that the reality is much more nuanced, much more, let's see how this pans out. We are, as you mentioned, in a global crisis much bigger than football. So let's not get carried away trying to work out how we're going to get these 22 players back on the pitch as soon as possible. But let's just take as long as we need to as you rightly point out, try and finish this season, which we've already played so much of. I'm fairly confident personally that it will eventually get finished. I think it makes far too much sense to not do, in the sense that we're so far through the season. But you never know. It's still open-ended. We can only hope from a Liverpool perspective.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think one thing we've talked about before actually is that there's so much money at stake if they don't finish. That sort of, I know, I've read a bit about some of the teams kind of lower down in the league who've admitted to having precarious finances, who might not be able to afford to pay the amount of money back that's being talked about.
And that's in terms of like television rights and things like that.
Yeah, that's a big part of it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Charlie, you make a good point too, Charlie. Though that it is setting a precedent. What do you do if the thing pops up again? It just makes sense to finish the current season whenever you can do it, and then start the next one whenever you can.
Yep. However, I really think the Champions League season should just be canned so we can continue to be European champions. I mean, that's only fair, really.
Well, that's a little easier anyway because it's a cup competition. The problem with the league is the relegation and promotion. To me, that's the biggest problem. Like, what about a club like Leeds that's been 20 years trying to get promoted, and they're basically there? You're going to cancel it and tell them too bad? I just can't see that happening, you know. But
yeah, that would be a terrible turn of events, wouldn't it, if the Premier League continued and the European competitions got cancelled?
Rat.
Yeah, we would just have the cup for another year, right?
Yeah. Yeah. One other thing that I think we wanted to touch on was, and it was in some of the Facebook feeds this week, which was what is football going to look like when it comes back, and how drastically will this change people's perspective on like the value of players, the value of contracts. We touched on before we started that clickbait item about Adam Lallana being the most valuable player in football right now because he's out of contract and won't cost anything to sign. But one other thing I'd add is when we talked to the guys from the Anfield Wrap, they didn't seem kind of too. They didn't think the idea of signing Werner at whatever his buyout clause is was as attractive now as it might have been before all this happened, which probably says something about their impression of how the market is changing. So, just your thoughts on that, James? Just about what you might speculate might happen with transfer fees and the rest.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. And I think it's hard to discuss really because it's so contingent on whatever the resolution is in terms of how we finish the season, what we do with these expiring contracts. Because if it is a case of sort of agreeing that we can extend these contracts unilaterally at club level by sort of 3 months or however long it takes to finish the season, then I don't think there'll be a huge effect on the market because it does just sort of delay what was already going to happen by a couple of months. But whether that'll be possible, I mean, it seems unlikely. Contracts, the whole sort of basis of them is two-sided. So there could definitely be issues with that, and that will then throw the market into something of a more kind of uncertain state. And then, yeah, you do have to reassess what you thought would be a good deal. So something like a Werner. I mean, there was that rumoured release clause, which I think is supposed to have expired by now anyway. But assuming that was still there, there could be better, cheaper options out there, more bargains to be picked up if indeed there are going to be these sort of free agents in limbo floating around. Then yeah, I mean it's worth taking a look at them and seeing where the value is, which I think is something Liverpool's recruitment team have been very strong on for a long time now.
Yeah.
Well, you also have to consider, I mean, how is this going to affect revenue? That then flows on to financial fair play and whether that's adjusted or whether we are given an allowance for the loss of revenue for this current period. And thirdly, of course, you have the Man City court case, which I assume has been pushed back because of this. And if City wins that and gets those 2 years of ban thrown out, what does that do to financial fair play and UEFA and FIFA itself potentially having little to no power over this whole thing? So, I mean, there's a number of variables there which are going to determine how much you can spend without getting in trouble. And with all the everything up in the air for the coming 6 months, a year, maybe more, well then now all of a sudden throwing down 40 million or whatever it was for anyone is a much bigger gamble than it would have been had none of this happened. So just the fact that you don't know how so many of these things are going to be affected, to me says, well, maybe we just put Lallana back on for another year instead of going for I mean, who knows?
Yeah, and it's very possible with this whole City thing, just touching on that we will have this kind of bizarre, ironic situation where City's case is going through the courts, through Court of Arbitration for Sport, and probably beyond, at a time where financial fair play has been suspended for the future, because I think that seems the only way out of this. Because I mean, so many clubs are running at operating losses for the next at least couple of years through the knock-on effects from this, I'm sure. So, I mean, they can't keep FFP in the same form right now. So we'll be seeing clubs who suddenly don't have to obey it as much, while City are still having their sort of case running through the courts from when the regulations were still in force. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out.
And that's one of the things I've read is that unfortunately instead of maybe bringing parity to the situation, it's probably going to be a situation of the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer again. So that gap between the top 6 or 7, however you want to look at it, is going to become even wider than the relegation kind of teams.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah. So, Tim, how are we doing for time? Because we'll maybe give James a chance to ask us some questions about supporters clubs, maybe give him some fuel for future articles.
We're just about there.
We're just about
30 minutes.
Okay. Well, let's spend 5 minutes.
Right on.
So, James, ask away.
Yeah, brilliant.
Right.
Yeah, thanks a lot. So I suppose I'll start off with just what the supporters club is looking like now in these kind of coronavirus times. I mean, I know you're on these calls regularly. I'm wondering what other sort of stuff you're doing to keep the group going during the times you can't physically meet up.
Everyone, you're looking at me to answer this, aren't you?
Yeah. Paul's the ringleader.
So what we've settled into, I think, is a pattern of 3 opportunities to meet up a week. We're obviously doing these podcasts, which hopefully are helping some people with their experience. The 3 times a week we just do a check-in in the middle of the week. Fridays is a happy hour, and we've last couple of weeks we've had guests on, which has been awesome. We had Anfield Rap guys, Craig and John, and Chris Perkins last night. Still looking to make a booking if anyone's interested for next Friday. And then we've been doing kind of a combination of watch party, and we had a quiz night on Saturday, so that's a bit more fluid. I don't think we've had a call with more than 20 people on, but it's not the same kind of group of people. So I think altogether we've probably connected with, I would say, maybe as close as 40 people on the different things we've done. And one of the reasons we started that reach out to a red thing this week is I think we were very conscious that there was a lot of people we just hadn't heard from, hadn't even been contributing towards any of the kind of social media stuff. So I think we're kind of hoping to get a few more people to kind of connect, because I think at this point I don't know what our kind of time frame for all of this is, but I'm assuming this is what we're going to be doing for another month, and that's kind of what we've been planning for in terms of podcasts and other events. Anything else to add?
We can do the email.
Okay.
Okay, yeah.
Facebook. Yeah. Tim.
I was going to say that it's kind of a strange, like, 2 fronts that we're looking at this one. One is obviously with the club's success this season. As Paul said, we've been seeing numbers that we've not seen previously showing up for match days. So there's a sense of not wanting to lose that momentum. But obviously some people who are not necessarily, who were somewhat peripheral to the club to begin with, they're the ones we're losing contact with. So the reach out to a red is important on that front. But I have this hope that these times of connecting just strictly on a social level will actually strengthen the core of the club a bit more and be something going forward where instead of it's match day and we're together for 2 hours and then you go home, that maybe, on a night when there is no match, we'll get together and just talk to each other as people. Maybe that'll be a good thing. So that could be a good thing that comes out of this. And it'll just be a different kind of momentum.
Yeah. I've heard several people have reached out to me kind of individually and have said exactly what you just said about, I'm hoping this is a platform for kind of, a stronger bond, not just based around watching games. Which has been nice. Yeah. So it's probably worth kind of highlighting numbers because 10, 20, 40 doesn't sound that many. We've got 300 people on our distribution list. And actually I'm forgetting now, but I think our signed up member count was close to 200. So we had 200 people who had signed up as official members of our supporters club this year. So, and I think we're conscious that we're not touching the majority, actually, even if we are doing social media and we send out a bi-weekly bulletin, which used to be kind of very light and fun about games and what's coming up and, and now it seems to have taken on a kind of a public service announcement kind of flavor to it.
But I think this format, especially with guests, is definitely something you could do moving forward. You know, if people were still interested after everything opens up, because it's a good way to like Tim was saying, connect with people outside the pub, and it's a good way to connect with people overseas, like James and Anfield Rap guys, and so I think this is pretty cool. Yeah. There are some positive things that will come out of this. We just probably can't see them right now,
It's given us more time to watch the Barcelona highlights.
and even older. I haven't watched. I told you guys I was watching Steve Gerrard highlights this week, and I think last week I was watching a bunch of Fowler highlights. So
I think one thing that we had on our agenda that we haven't touched yet, and maybe we could use just to finish without a whole lot of discussion about it, just because I actually did research, because it's the kind of person I am, is Liverpool 5-a-side. Who would you pick?
Oh.
This was a good question, James. Thank you. Yeah.
This is the current squad?
Everyone. History.
Oh, God.
How long you got?
Yeah. It's not as weird as I have, but...
Sorry, no discussion?
Just names. Maybe we'll get to a discussion next week.
Get to name one.
That's another one. That's it actually led me to watch a lot of John Barnes clips this morning. Paul had mentioned him last night as your favorite. Was that the question?
He's up there. He's in the conversation.
Yeah, and comparing him to like Luis Suarez as your like striker, some of his handling and just the way he just like seemed to walk right around people, he made my list for sure. Just because
the thing is, you just think, how are we thinking about this? Because you're thinking who would be good at 5-a-side. Suddenly, it's a bit different to who's the best 5 ever. So someone like a Dirk Kuyt, he would, all due respect to him, he wouldn't get into my best 5 Liverpool players of all time. But I'd back him in 5-a-side because of the graft. He would run for you all day long.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, initially, I was thinking like I want an Ian Rush up top for sure. But then that's the other thing. Like, he's great at finishing in close. But you watch Suarez and Barnes and some of their shots from outside the box.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that guy could be dangerous from anywhere on the pitch. So I'm going to want a guy like that. Whereas, Gerrard, obviously.
I think I'd just go down the sort of absolute yard dogs route. Get Mascherano in, get Suarez in, get Kuyt in.
Yeah.
You don't need
I think 5-a-side.
And Milner can play all of the back positions.
Yeah, I had Steven Gerrard as my keeper, so there we go.
Oh, yeah.
Sweeper keeper.
You'd probably do a job as well.
Put Van Dijk in a keeper.
Yeah.
That would work too. Or a striker. I mean,
Yeah.
The Celtic days, right? That's probably not the best question to end on. Sorry about that.
So I did have a 5 actually. So just if you want to kind of round it out, because I had gone down the path of Alisson is the best goalkeeper I've ever seen and could play with his feet. You've got Van Dijk, and then you don't need to worry about any other defensive positions. Yeah. So you could play like people who don't come back. And so therefore I'd have gone with Dalglish, Barnes, and probably Mane.
Oh, yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, that speed would kill. Yeah.
Yeah,
I went also Alisson and Virgil. I went with a 1-2-1. So I Virgil at the back, Gerrard and Alonso in midfield, and then Barnes up front. Because I mean they're all attackers / midfielders / defenders at that point. So.
Good stuff.
Anyone else? No. Sean, we blowing Sean's mind.
I'm thinking.
To be continued, perhaps.
Well, out of respect for our captain, Hendo's getting in my side. That's all I'll say.
Yeah.
That's the keeper.
Oh.
He's going to hold everyone together and tell them where the hell they're supposed to be.
Uh-huh. Actually, next week maybe we can.
Alisson, you sort him out.
So I'm going to go. I'll go Thompson, Souness, Dalglish, Gerrard, and Suarez.
Oh, off the cuff like that is impressive. To be fair,
it wasn't completely off the cuff. I was doing a little research here on that.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought you had like a piece of paper. You're like writing.
Well, I was. Yeah. I was trying to be fair and cover the history a little bit. Can't forget all. We did win. What was it? 4 European Cups in the 70s and 80s. And I don't think you can leave those players out.
Yeah.
Someone's going to get left out, right?
Yeah.
So I know we need to wrap up. We've got to close on the kind of fun topic. I think I'd describe this section as what's the Arrigo Sacchi quote of football is the most important of the least important things in life. Well, we're going to go down the list of least important things now a bit further to talk about the recent FIFA games. So I'm going to leave it there because that's the limit to my knowledge.
I had actually heard of it, and then I just happened across it on, what day was that? Wednesday, and it just, as I was flipping through the channels, saw that Trent Alexander-Arnold was playing Vinicius Jr. And it was a Liverpool match because Trent was representing Liverpool and Vinicius was representing Real Madrid. And from following social media of Liverpool, we all know that Trent has played FIFA once or twice, an hour. And I kind of joked about it. I made a post on our Facebook page about it. Like, I'm settling in with a beer at 3:00 on a weekday afternoon to watch 2 grown football on a computer, but found myself yelling at the television just because I'm so
we're so deprived of actual football.
Yeah,
exactly. I thought, well, this is sad, and then I'm like, oh, come on, boys, here we go.
I was watching it one other night. It might have been Monday or Tuesday night. It was on. I stumbled on it, and it was like 2 amateurs, and like this guy from Brøndby was incredible. His name was Jesper or something, and he won like 10-2 or something. He like killed this other guy. And I can't remember what club the other guy was playing with, but it was someone that was better than Brøndby. It might have been like Valencia or something, or Marseille. So anyway, so you posted on social media that Trent was on, and they had talked about that because they showed the bracket when I was watching, and I wanted to watch the Trent one, so I turned it on about halfway through, and he absolutely dominated the match. I guess I didn't watch the whole thing, but he won 4-1, and that was including like 2 terrible misses on wide open chances, and he hit the bar too. So he should have won by a lot more. But.
It served to make me feel really bad about myself that he's a terrific athlete in real life, and also on a video game. So,
okay. Well, he probably doesn't drink at all, right? So. In his free time, he probably plays FIFA rather than going to the pub or drinking or whatever.
And apparently FaceTimes with Andy Robertson a lot.
Yeah, that was funny too. Yeah, that was really funny.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
Yeah.
Hey, James, thank you so much for joining us today. Really
thanks a lot for having me on.
Thanks, James.
I really enjoyed it. Yeah.
Yeah. So one thing I'd suggest, if you want to join our Facebook group, and feel free to post whatever you're writing about. We're always looking for good content. So if you're up for that, that would be awesome.
Yeah, great. Thanks.
Okay.
Argue about.
There's been less arguing lately, actually.
Comprehensive write-up of Trent's FIFA matches.
Right.
Yeah, hey,
you might be onto something.
Right about. There you go.
Because that probably got the most traffic of any post this week, actually, which is kind of sad.
It was mostly me, Timmy, and Gary, right, going back and forth commenting.
It's amazing how you can get into these simulations when that's all you have. Hey, it's my guys playing.
Yeah, exactly. It was half joking.
Let's cheer like it's the Barcelona match.
The result is still the question. That's what we have going for us these days. You watch as many replays that you like, but you know exactly what's going to happen. This one is a surprise, at least.
Yeah.
Sorry, Paul, we messed up your wrapping up there a little bit.
This is pretty common, and this is why I generally prefer Tim to direct things, because he's got more control. But so if you're listening,
more authority,
watching, stay safe, and we'll talk next week.